The alarm was screaming again, that same rising double pulse that used to cut through the half-sleep of night crews and make your teeth hurt if you were close enough to the panel. The sound bounced off the glass and metal around me, thin and sharp. Under it, I could feel that faint electrical hum in the walls, like the whole terminal was trembling in a dream it couldn't wake from. The air smelled of old fuel, cold rust, and salt so bitter it felt chemical. I was standing in front of a dead console that shouldn't have had power. Frost had crept over the inside of the window beside it. A white skin feathered across the glass. Beyond that frost, out over the black water, a ferry was drifting sideways toward the dock. No running lights, no deck lights, no wake behind it. Just a blunt, dark shape moving across a surface that looked solid enough to walk on. The radio on the desk clicked. Then a voice came through, calm as a dispatcher reading weather advisories. "You already ignored this once." I knew that voice. It was mine. My hand moved before I told it to. I reached for the mute switch, and in the blue flash from the panel, I saw my fingers were already there, pressed down over the rubber cap as if I had been holding it the whole time. The alarm cut off in the middle of its second pulse. Out on the water, the ferry kept sliding closer without a sound. Then something hit the side of the hull from inside, just one hard knock. And all I could think was, if my hand had beaten me to the button, then how many times had I already done it? I need to go back to the beginning. And the first thing I noticed about Pier 17B was the hum. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a faint vibration in the walls and floor, the kind you usually stopped hearing after 10 minutes in a control room. Only this place had been decommissioned for almost 4 years. And according to the county contractor who hired me for the winter rotation, most of the systems inside were either disconnected or running on maintenance power. So there shouldn't have been anything left in that building with enough life in it to hum. The second thing I noticed was the smell. Old marine fuel has a sweet edge when it sits too long in cold weather. Mix that with freezing salt air and wet plywood and the stale breath of closed rooms, and the whole terminal smelled like a machine that had been shut down in a hurry and never properly drained. And it was strong enough that I tasted it before I saw the water. Pier 17B sat off the active route north side of Bainbridge, far enough from the main traffic that even locals mostly forgot it was there. The road out had no streetlights for the last stretch. Just brush, black trees, and the kind of winter dark that made the headlights feel weak. The contractor had called it passive monitoring, a temporary assignment. Show up, sign in, keep an eye on the legacy systems that still touched older maritime channels, note any power anomalies, call the county if anything actually mattered. Nothing actually mattered there, according to him. That was why they could afford me. I hadn't worked regular ferry operations in years. Not after the hearings, not after the reviews. Not after my name got attached to an incident report that people in Kitsap County still remembered even if they pretended not to. I took what I could get after that. Harbor maintenance, private dock inspections, seasonal monitoring jobs where nobody asked too many questions because nobody wanted the shift themselves. A decommissioned terminal in winter overnight alone sounded almost restful. That was what I told myself driving in. The lot was empty except for a county pickup with 2 flat tires and a skin of frost across the windshield. My boots ground salt and gravel underfoot as I crossed to the side entrance. The key had been left in a lockbox exactly where the email said it would be. The metal of it burned cold in my hand. Inside, the silence hit me wrong. It wasn't true silence. The hum was there. A relay clicked somewhere deep in the building every so often. Pipes throbbed once, then settled. But there was no surf under it, no slap of waves against pilings, no distant ferry engines, no gulls. I could hear my own coat sleeve brush against the doorframe. I could hear my breath. When I reached the operations room, I understood why the place made the contractor nervous enough to staff it even after closure. The terminal wasn't alive exactly, but it wasn't dead either. Half the panels had been stripped. Empty brackets showed where monitors used to hang. Old routing maps had been taken down, leaving cleaner rectangles on the walls. But a secondary console still had power, and one weather monitor glowed green in the dark. A marine band receiver sat in standby with its speaker light off. An auxiliary alert board had 3 tiny bulbs lit under channels marked inactive. That was the word all over the room. Inactive. Inactive radar feed. Inactive route advisory. Inactive docking relay. Inactive emergency acknowledgement panel. I hung up my coat, signed the paper log on the desk, and started the kind of routine you do to prove to yourself that the world still works the way it should. Checked door seals, tested overheads, verified backup battery indicator. Logged the outside temperature from the one sensor still reporting cleanly. Looked for water intrusion around the window frames. The work helped. So did the language of it. Systems, statuses, channels, readings. If you stayed with procedure, you didn't have to notice what the room felt like. The main clock above the doorway said a little after 11, and the console clock said 12 minutes earlier. My phone said something else entirely, then lost signal and froze on the lock screen before correcting itself. Old buildings did that, cheap replacements, untethered network boards. I told myself there was nothing strange about mismatched time in a facility that had been halfway dismantled and rewired by contractors. Still, I noticed it. I noticed the mute switches, too. Every alarm panel had them, rubber caps gone smooth with use. Some yellowed with age, some newer. One on the auxiliary board had a half-moon crack near the edge, and when I saw it, I knew exactly how it would feel under a thumb before I touched it. That wasn't strange either. I had trained in Kitsap County in a dispatch room where the older techs taught you that not every signal deserved a full response. False positives happened. Crossed channels happened. Weather anomalies, battery faults, sensors that screamed whenever rain got into the casing. If you lunged at every alarm like it was a Mayday, you'd burn yourself out in a week. So you learned the categories, learned the tones, learned which sounds meant look now and which ones meant wait 10 seconds and see if the system corrected itself. You learned how to mute. I made coffee in the break alcove because it gave my hands something to do. The water came out of the old machine lukewarm. The coffee smelled fresh anyway, stronger than it should have, and for a second I thought someone had brewed a pot an hour earlier and forgotten it. But the carafe was dry. I stood there with the empty cup, warming my fingers, and listened to the building breathe through the vents, and the window over the dock had a wide view of the slip. The water beyond it looked black and flat as sheet metal. A scrap of loose packing foam drifted near the pilings. I watched it for maybe 30 seconds, waiting for it to bob or turn with the current. It didn't move. I opened the side access door and stepped out onto the service landing to get some air. The cold hit the back of my throat hard enough to sting. Salt and fuel and something metallic hung over the water. I picked up a loose nut from the decking and tossed it over the rail. I heard it hit, a small, clean plink. The water swallowed it without a ripple. I remember telling myself that was just the angle, just the darkness, just the bad light off the dock lamps. Looking back, that was the first lie I heard myself accept. I went back inside, shut the door, and started a second circuit of the room. The contractor's notes were still clipped beside the paper log. Passive monitoring only. Report persistent faults. Do not reactivate any retired system without county authorization. There was nothing in there about traffic on old channels. Nothing about emergency relays throwing ghost signals. Nothing about the way the hum in the walls seemed to shift depending on where I stood, like it was following me from console to console. At a little before midnight by one clock, a little after by another, the panel marked inactive emergency acknowledgement lit up red. Then the alarm went off. It wasn't just similar to the tone I remembered from years before. It was exact. A double pulse with a clipped rise at the end, like the second note had been cut with a blade. I felt it in my shoulders before I fully heard it. My hand shot out on reflex toward the mute switch that cracked Half Moon 1 and stopped just above it. For a second, I wasn't in Pier 17B. I was back in a dim operations room with my head heavy from too much coffee and too little sleep, watching rain crawl down the outside glass while a stalled vessel advisory looped through the system, and I told myself somebody else had already picked it up. The sound kept drilling into the room. I made myself look at the display. Source location blank. Root code unreadable. Status active. Timestamp flickering. It changed so fast I couldn't hold on to it. One moment it showed the current date and time, or what I thought was the current date and time. The next it rolled backward, numbers smeared, the year looked wrong, and the month field pulsed. It settled for half a second on a time I knew too well, then skipped forward again before I could trust what I'd seen. I told myself it was a frozen legacy board trying to sync with a dead network. I told myself old maritime systems pulled bad stamps all the time when the internal clock battery failed. I told myself the tone only felt familiar because alarm design didn't vary much from one county installation to the next. The rational part of me had language for all of it. The rest of me had sweat gathering cold under my shirt. I leaned toward the window over the dock, trying to confirm a source visually, though I didn't know yet that those exact words were going to matter. Outside, the slip was empty. The old lights over the loading lane were dead. The water was still that same impossible black, yet flat enough to reflect the faint interior glow in a sheet. No ferry, no distress flare, no movement. The alarm kept sounding. I should have let it keep going, I know that now. But there are instincts you build over years in a control room, and one of them is that noise becomes a problem of its own if you don't manage it. Noise fogs judgment. Noise makes you rush. Noise creates the illusion that you've already acted because your body has been responding the whole time. I pressed mute. The silence that followed was worse. The click of the button was soft. The cutoff was instant. My ears kept expecting the second pulse to finish, and when it didn't, the room felt too large, too open, as if something had stepped closer the moment I took the sound away. Even the hum in the walls seemed to dip and then return. I kept staring at the display, and the timestamp had frozen. 5 years earlier. Not the same day of the week, not even the same weather conditions if the corrupted barometric reading meant anything. But the year was right, the hour was right. Close enough that my stomach tightened before my mind caught up. I blinked and the stamp jumped back to the present. A glitch, I said out loud. My voice sounded wrong in there. Too flat, like someone else's imitation of me. I keyed the Marine Band receiver and tried a maintenance call on the county line. Static. I tried the contractor's number. One ring, then dead air, then a burst of clipped feedback that sounded almost like breathing before the line dropped. Cell service still showed nothing. I walked to the break alcove and came back, half convinced I just needed motion to shake off the feeling that the room had narrowed. On the paper log, my handwriting looked steady. 0 hours, 07 minutes. Inactive alert tone triggered on auxiliary emergency board. No visible source. Alarm muted. Monitoring for repeat. I finished the sentence, then stared at it. Monitoring for repeat. I didn't remember deciding to use that word. A second later, the red light flashed again. The same alarm hit harder the second time. Maybe because now I was waiting for it. Same clipped double pulse. Same immediate pressure in the chest, like bad news arriving through bone instead of air. The display field came alive with static and garbled characters. The timestamp didn't flicker this time. It held. 5 years ago, same hour. Same minute I had written into statements until the numbers stopped meaning anything. My hand didn't move toward mute right away, and that was the only improvement I made. Then the radio clicked. There was a wash of static, a whine of open channel, and then my own voice came through the speaker, thinner and younger and tired in a way I remembered too well. "It's probably nothing." I stopped breathing. The line repeated, warped a little at the end as if the tape had stretched. "It's probably nothing." That wasn't from any official recording I had ever heard after the incident. The reviewed audio had alarms, channel traffic, the dispatch line, the point where the unanswered distress calls kept stacking while I sat there with my eyes shut and my judgment off. But that sentence, said in that tone, had been under my breath, barely louder than a thought. I had said it to the empty room. I had never written it down. Nobody had quoted it back to me. The speaker hissed. Then, in quieter, my own voice again. "Give it a minute." I stepped back from the desk so fast my chair legs screeched against the floor. The alarm continued. The red light pulsed. The display scrolled a block of text, then froze. I leaned in and read it twice before I understood why my mouth had gone dry. Operator Reyes lifts right hand. Operator Reyes hesitates. Operator Reyes will silence active tone. The last line sat there waiting. I looked down. My right hand was still at my side. I remember laughing once, under my breath, because the alternative was admitting that a dead terminal on Bainbridge Island was writing my next movement before I made it. I told myself somebody had left in a diagnostic routine. An old training simulator maybe, wired by accident into a live panel. Some kind of stress test script tied to archived incident language. And if county maintenance had cut corners, if they'd repurposed boards from another facility, if they'd failed to wipe an old event library, then maybe you could get fragments. Weird ones, specific ones, still not impossible. That was the kind of thinking I clung to. Methodical, conditional, built from maybes. The alarm kept going. I read the display again. Operator Reyes will silence active tone. My hand rose. I wish I could tell you I stopped because of fear or conscience, or because some better part of me recognized the trap. The truth was uglier than that. I stopped because I wanted to prove the screen wrong. Then the sound bored deeper into my skull and irritation won out over caution just like it had before, and I pressed the button just to make it stop. The red light went dark. On the display, a new line populated. The Operator Reyes silences active tone. Then beneath it, after a pause long enough to feel deliberate, repeat acknowledged. The room temperature dropped all at once. Not enough for frost to form, not dramatic. Just enough that the skin on my wrists tightened and I could see my breath for one thin exhale before it vanished. The radio stayed quiet. Outside the window, the slip was still empty. On the paper log beside me, there was a fresh line in handwriting that looked enough like mine to turn my stomach. Second occurrence. Same pattern. Probably nothing. I hadn't written it. I know now that was the moment my confidence actually broke, not when I heard my voice, not even when the timestamp fixed itself to the year I had spent trying to survive on paper. It was seeing my excuse appear in a hand that could have been mine, in knowing it had the same lazy slant in the Y and the same hard pressure on the T. That was the last normal decision I made in that building, and it was only normal because I still thought there might be a way to explain it. I tore the page out of the paper log and held it up to the desk lamp. Same paper stock, same pen bleed, same indentation from the line above where I had signed in. I flipped back through the previous pages. Nothing unusual until the last sheet where the carbon imprint of those words pressed faintly into the page beneath like a bruise. Probably nothing. The radio clicked again, but this time no voice came through. Just static with a pulse in it, as if someone were keying a mic and letting go, keying it and letting go. I adjusted the volume. The sound thinned. Then I heard something else from farther back in the room, and a cup touching a countertop, small, ceramic, distinct. I turned too fast and had the stupid, impossible thought that the break alcove would be empty and occupied at the same time. It was occupied. A man stood by the coffee machine with one hand braced on the counter and the other around a white mug. He was maybe my age, maybe a little older. Winter jacket open over a faded terminal operations sweater that looked like a uniform from a different decade. His hair was damp at the temples as if he'd just come in from rain, except it hadn't been raining when I arrived. His face had that hollow, overtired look you saw on graveyard crews after too many quiet shifts in a row. He looked at me like we'd already been talking. "Did it repeat yet?" he asked. The smell of coffee hit me then, fresh and bitter, stronger than anything that machine had produced for me. Under it was salt and old fuel and that same metallic cold. I didn't answer right away. He glanced toward the panel, then back at me. "Twice, if you're still acting like it's a glitch." "Who are you?" "Avery Pike." He took a sip. The mug was steaming. "I'm on shift." "No, you're not." He gave me a tired little shrug. "Depends what day you're using." I stared at him. There are wrong notes in the body that hit before the mind can name them. Mine was this. I hadn't heard the side door open. I hadn't heard footsteps in the hall. The floorboards between the ops room and the alcove always complained when I crossed them. He had crossed without a sound. He seemed to see that thought pass through me. "Yeah," he said, "it's doing that already." "Doing what?" "Making you pick the explanation that hurts less." He set the mug down. I heard the cup touch the counter again, same sound as before, precise enough that a cold line ran down my spine. "What date do you have?" I looked at the wall clock by reflex. It now matched the console clock exactly down to the second. My phone screen in my pocket buzzed against my leg, though there was no service, and when I pulled it out, the lock screen showed a day 3 days later than the paper schedule in front of me. "Thursday," I said. Avery watched me for a moment, then looked genuinely sorry. "It isn't," he said, "not for me." The hum in the walls deepened. Somewhere in the terminal a printer kicked on, fed half a sheet, and stopped. I should have demanded ID. I should have called county security even if the line sounded dead. I should have asked how he got in, how long he'd been there, why his jacket shoulders were beaded with moisture from weather that hadn't happened. Instead, I asked the question that had already sunk its teeth into me. "What day is it for you?" "Monday night," he said. 3 days before you start lying to yourself on purpose." I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you'll get that stays true for more than a minute." He nodded toward the auxiliary panel. "You muted it twice?" I didn't tell him yes. He must have seen it anyway. "Don't trust the logs," he said. "Don't trust the clocks. And when the system starts using the word repeat, stop pretending that's just software language." The printer in the back room chattered again, and I glanced toward the sound. When I looked back, Avery had moved closer, though I hadn't seen him cross the floor. Not threateningly, just closer. His eyes flicked to the torn page in my hand. "It wrote ahead of you, didn't it?" I felt something unpleasant shift under my ribs. "How would you know that?" "Because it always does that before it gets personal." The word always should have sent me running. So should the way he said it, not as a guess, not as a warning, but as memory. Instead, I asked, "What is this place?" Avery smiled without warmth. "A terminal." "Don't do that." "All right," he said. "It's a bad loop with wiring around it. Is that better?" "No." "No, probably not." He picked up the mug again, and when he drank from it, I saw that his knuckles were red with cold. On his left wrist was a cheap digital watch with a cracked face. The seconds display was frozen. I didn't notice the number then. I only remember the crack, a white line running through the plastic like trapped frost. The screen on the auxiliary board flared, went black, and came back with a full page of errors. System repeat, root repeat, archive repeat, acknowledgement repeat. The same word stacked so many times it stopped looking like English. Avery didn't turn around to read it. He said quietly, "If it gives you a source, don't believe the time. If it gives you a time, don't believe the source. If it gives you both, leave the room." How do you know any of that? He looked at me then with an expression I still don't know how to name. Pity, maybe, or recognition? Something too intimate for strangers and too tired for friendship. Because by the time you ask that, he said, you've already repeated the part where you don't listen. I heard the printer spit out a page in the supervisor's office. The sound was so abrupt in the stillness that both of us flinched. Avery's eyes went past me toward the hall. "Don't read it if it has your name in the first line," he said. "What?" But he'd gone pale in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. He looked at the watch on his wrist, the frozen one, then past me again toward the dark hall. The sound came next. My own footsteps from somewhere I wasn't, fast approaching, stopping just outside the room. I turned toward the doorway. The hall beyond it was empty. When I looked back, Avery was farther away again, standing by the alcove as if he had never moved at all. That was when I understood the building wasn't just producing bad data. It was arranging distance, and it was moving cause and effect around like furniture. I wish I could say I left then. Instead, I followed the sound of the printer. The supervisor's office smelled like dust, cold paper, and the faint sour trace of mildew under all of it. The fluorescent light inside had a stuttering buzz that made the room feel half awake. File cabinets lined one wall. A routing map of Puget Sound still hung crooked above the desk, all its colored lines faded to the same tired blue. The printer sat on a side table with a single page sticking out of it, only halfway fed. I listened before I touched it. No footsteps behind me, no voices, just the hum in the walls and the distant patient creak of the building settling in cold. The page wasn't about me, at least not at first glance. It was a maintenance log header, corrupted and broken around the edges, and the text full of gaps and misaligned fields. At the top, in block letters, it read "Last Active Shift, Lorraine Haskett." That name meant nothing to me then. It does now. I pulled the sheet free and read. Most of it was junk. Timestamp errors, channel failures, notes overwritten by strings of repeating symbols. Then halfway down, in a paragraph that looked like it had been typed and retyped until the letters wore thin, there was a sentence that made my mouth go dry. "If you're reading this after the second repeat, the building has chosen sequence over chronology again." Below that was a list, not formatted cleanly, not official. More like someone forcing instructions into a system field never meant to hold them. Do not silence any alarm unless you can confirm its source visually. I had already broken that one, and if the same alert repeats more than twice, assume it has already happened. My skin tightened across the back of my neck. Never trust the timestamp on any system display. I looked reflexively toward the hall clock and hated myself for doing it. If you see another worker, confirm the date before speaking to them. I had spoken to Avery for several minutes without asking that first. Not really asking it. Not in time. Not before the conversation had already begun. If the ferry arrives without lights, do not acknowledge it. My fingers went cold around the page. If you hear your own voice on the radio, do not respond. I could hear the radio in the operations room clicking faintly as if it had waited for me to finish reading. At the bottom of the log, Lorraine Haskett had typed one last note. The text doubled over itself in places, but I could still make it out. It does not trap everyone the same way. It uses whatever you already failed to answer. I stood there with the paper shaking in my hand, telling myself this was staged, a cruel joke by a former employee, A county myth, an elaborate leftover training artifact layered over older incident records. Anything but a direct line between this dead terminal and the one night of my life I had spent years trying to file into neutral language. Because that was the thing I hadn't said out loud yet, not even to myself in that building. I knew that alarm, not because of general training, not because all warning tones sound alike after enough years in marine operations. I knew it because once in another room over another stretch of black water, and it had sounded and sounded while I closed my eyes for what I told myself was a second. The official version said I failed to respond promptly to repeated distress signals from a stalled vessel. The recording said more than that. They proved I heard them. They proved I muted at least one alert. They proved I stayed in my chair while the vessel drifted toward the rocky inlet east of the route. 2 passengers never got free before the water came in. By the time rescue arrived, there was nothing useful left for me to do except answer questions. The archived system logs kept my failure better than memory ever could. Time, channel, acknowledgement missed, operator inactive during active emergency sequence. That language can keep a man alive if he lets it. It can turn choice into procedure, and it can make dead people sound like consequences instead of people. In the office, with Lorraine Haskett's log in my hand and the hum of the terminal moving through the wall like blood through a vein, all that careful language started to rot. The printer kicked once more and produced a second page. This one had my name in the first line. Operator Colton Reyes proceeds to office after second repeat. Reads rules too late. I dropped it. The sheet slapped the floor with a dry paper sound that felt louder than the alarm had. I backed out of the office and nearly ran into Avery in the hall. He hadn't made a sound approaching. He never did. His eyes went to the page in my hand, then to my face. You found Lorraine. Who is she? Last supervisor who thought rules were the same thing as control. That wasn't an answer either, and I was getting tired of those. Did you know she was here? Avery nodded once. Depends when you mean. I held up the page. These are real? He looked at the rules without taking the paper. Real enough to matter. That's not good enough. No, he said, and for the first time he sounded angry. Not at me exactly, but near me. It isn't. But good enough is how this place gets you. Good enough logs. Good enough explanations. Good enough certainty that if the panel doesn't show a source, then it doesn't need you yet. That hit harder than it should have because it wasn't generic. It was too close to the thought pattern I had lived inside for years. Not urgent enough. Not confirmed enough. Not mine yet. I folded the page once, careful without meaning to be, and tucked it into my coat pocket. When the auxiliary alarm fired again before I got back into the operations room. Same tone, same pulse. This time the red light didn't flash alone. 2 others came on with it, boards that had been dead 10 minutes earlier. One display showed a route map of Puget Sound with no active tracks. Another showed a docking schematic with one slip highlighted. 17B. The timestamp read 5 years ago. Then it read tonight. Then it read an hour from then. I didn't touch the mute switch. Outside the window, something moved beyond the pilings. Not fast, not clear. Just a dark interruption in the black line of the water. I leaned toward the glass and immediately hated that I couldn't tell if it was approaching or already there. The radio hissed. My own voice came through in fragments. If it's urgent... Static. They'll call. Static again. In that one was private too. Not formal record, not spoken into a channel. A mutter into my sleeve while I watched lights through rain and chose not to stand up yet. Avery heard it. I knew from the way his jaw tightened. You said that? He asked quietly. I didn't answer. He didn't push. The alarm kept sounding, and beneath it, so low I almost missed it, there was another sound from outside. A horn, far off, single note, dead and low in the water. The unlit shape beyond the pilings was closer now. The terminal was not random. That was the thing I could no longer pretend. It had sequence. It had staging. It was advancing towards something with the patience of machinery and the intimacy of memory. And I had already broken the rules before I knew there were rules. After that, time stopped behaving even as well as broken time usually does. And the air in the operations room had that dry cold that makes your lips feel split before they actually are. The hum in the walls came and went in waves. Every metal surface I touched held a different temperature. The desk was cold enough to ache through my fingertips. The radio casing felt almost warm. I kept hearing sounds a second before they happened, then convincing myself I was only anticipating them. Avery moved around the room like he already knew where each moment would land. Not confidently. More like a man walking a familiar staircase in the dark. He'd tilt his head just before a relay clicked. He'd look at the window a heartbeat before the dock light outside flashed and went dead again. Once he reached for the radio volume knob, then stopped with his hand hovering over it. A second later, the speaker erupted with a scream. Not static, not feedback. A human scream, raw and brief, cut off so hard it felt snatched away. I jerked toward the sound. Avery didn't. The voice had been his. I turned to him. He was standing 2 feet from me, silent, hands at his sides, face gone flat. We both looked at the radio. Then it happened again. Avery's voice over the speaker, distant and ragged, shouting my name from somewhere full of wind and water. "Colton, don't let it repeat, don't let it Cut off mid-word. Beside me, Avery said nothing. Didn't even flinch that second time. He was watching me instead, as if my reaction was the actual event. "What the hell was that?" I said. "Not now," he said. "That was your voice." "I know." "From where?" Avery's mouth twitched like there was an answer he had already tried and failed to keep. "Later." "No." The alarm fired again, and except it didn't finish. It cut off halfway through the first pulse. The room held its breath. I looked at the panel. The red light was on. The speaker emitted one clip note, then silence. Then a few seconds later, the first half of the same note again. Every time I started toward the console, the sound would begin and then die before completion, as if the terminal were waiting to see whether hesitation itself counted as a response. That became the rhythm for the next stretch. Alarm beginning. Alarm severed. My body primed for sound that refused to arrive cleanly. Avery checked his watch. The cracked face still showed the same frozen time, though when I blinked I thought the seconds field had changed by 1 digit and then changed back. He said, almost to himself, "You don't answer this one." "What does that mean?" He kept looking at the watch. "It means in about 10 seconds the port side camera wakes up. In 15 the dock light flickers twice. In 20 the alarm goes full sequence." I counted without meaning to. At around 10 the dead camera monitor hissed to life with a grainy view of the slip. At 15 the dock light outside flickered twice. At 20 the alarm hit full pattern, clean and brutal, exactly as he had said. I turned to him so fast my chair tipped over behind me. "You've seen this." His expression stayed oddly calm, not smug, not pleased, just resigned in a way that frightened me more than panic would have. "I've lived this sequence," he said. The radio clicked. Avery's screaming voice came through again from somewhere else, somewhere ahead or behind or below, and impossible to place. Beside me, he stood still as a post. That was the moment I understood he wasn't just another trapped worker in the building. He was offset from me. Maybe by minutes, maybe by days, maybe by choices. The idea should have been absurd. It didn't feel absurd. It felt like the only thing in that room that matched the shape of what was happening. How many times? I asked. Avery gave a tired little laugh with no humor in it. Enough to stop pretending the clocks are wrong and start admitting the order is. Outside, past the pilings, the ferry showed itself. It didn't come out of fog. There wasn't any fog. It didn't rise over a swell because the water never swelled. One moment there was empty black water under a dead dock light. The next there was a vessel sitting just offshore, broadside to the terminal, in close enough that I could make out the upper deck windows as darker rectangles inside darkness. No lights, no wake, no engine noise, just a shape where there hadn't been one. Every hair on my arms lifted. The hull profile was wrong and familiar at the same time. Not the same class as the vessel from my old route, then suddenly exactly the same if I looked from the corner of my eye, then wrong again when I tried to focus. My brain kept trying to settle it into one answer and failing. "Don't acknowledge it," Avery said. "That's one of Lorraine's rules." "Yes. But if the same alert repeats more than twice, assume it already happened." "Yes." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Avery looked at me with that same expression from before, that painful, almost recognition. That's the part it wants. I don't know if he meant the building or the ferry or something shaped out of my own history and fed back through machinery. Maybe all three had stopped being separate by then. The screen on the route monitor filled with text, not code this time. A plain language incident summary and clipped official phrasing. Vessel adrift. Failure to respond, loss of life, the words blurred, then sharpened, then changed, vessel adrift, awaiting operator acknowledgement. Beneath that, in smaller text, repeat pending. Avery stepped in front of the console before I could reach it. "Listen to me," he said. "Whatever you hear next, it knows the words because you gave them to it. That doesn't mean it can tell you what to do." The intimacy of that almost undid me. Not because he was comforting. He wasn't. He sounded like a man reciting instructions from the far side of a collapse. But he knew exactly where the weak point was. Not fear of death. Not fear of ghosts. Fear that the worst thing I had done had become the truest thing about me and that anything speaking in my voice might deserve authority over me because of it. The radio hissed. Then, clear as if someone had leaned over my shoulder to whisper directly into my ear, my own voice said, "You closed your eyes for 1 second." I had never told anyone that. Not the board, not the lawyers, not the therapist I quit after 4 sessions. Not the woman I was with back then, who asked me why I couldn't sleep and why I sat bolt upright every time a microwave beeped in the apartment kitchen. The recordings had the alarms and the silence after and the line traffic I missed. But they didn't have the part where I pinched the bridge of my nose and told myself I would rest my eyes for 1 second. The speaker went on. "You made it easier by not looking." I shut my eyes then stupidly, instinctively, as if not seeing the room could change what it held. When I opened them, Avery was gone from my left side and standing by the window instead. Or he'd been there the whole time and I had missed the movement again. I don't know. What I know is that his reflection in the glass came a fraction of a second later than his body. I saw that. I wish I hadn't. It is hard to explain how reality frays without tearing. Nothing dramatic happened. The room stayed a room. The consoles stayed where they were. The sea beyond the dock stayed black and flat and unhelpful. But sequence loosened. A sound would happen and then echo backward into the moment before it. Avery would answer a question I hadn't spoken yet, then ask me something I had already answered. The clocks no longer disagreed. They simply rotated through possibilities as if date and time were being sampled instead of measured. And through all of it, the ferry sat offshore without lights. I know now that this was the point where escape stopped being a physical problem. The side door was still there. My truck keys were still in my coat. Bainbridge Island hadn't disappeared. But the choice had ceased to be leave or stay. The building had narrowed it into something more precise: repeat or refuse. The final sequence began with the exact alarm pattern from the night I ruined my life. There are sounds that years can't blunt, and I had spent half a decade trying to flatten that tone inside memory, filing it under incident, inquiry, consequence, negligence, anything that kept it from being what it really was. A plea. Not in words, not at first. Just a demand for human attention from a machine designed to force it. When the terminal gave me that same pattern in full, with the same spacing between pulses and the same clipped rise at the end, my body recognized it before thought did. My stomach dropped. My hands went numb. Every muscle in my back tightened around an old shame like it had been waiting in place all that time. Outside the window, the ferry moved. Not fast, not dramatic. A slow sideways drift toward the dock, just as it had in the cold open of the worst minute of my life. No engine wash, no deck lights, nothing human visible through the windows. And it should have looked unreal, it didn't. It looked procedural, like a vessel obeying broken instructions. Avery stood beside the console, eyes on the water. "This is it," he said. "You've said that before?" He didn't answer right away. "Yes." "How many times?" "I don't know anymore." I believed him. The route monitor populated with a vessel profile that kept changing names before settling on the one I didn't want to see. Not because it matched the old boat exactly, it didn't. Because it matched just enough. Same route region, same passenger count field blinking unknown, same stalled propulsion note in the remarks line, same weather advisory, same request for immediate response. I heard myself say no, not denial, recognition. Avery turned to me. "Ian, this is the moment that determines everything. The rule says if the ferry arrives without lights, don't acknowledge it. The rule says a lot of things. So what are the rules for if not this?" His face did something complicated then, something weary and almost furious. "To get you here." The radio burst alive with voices, my voice first saying, "Wait for confirmation." Then my voice again, overlapping it, harsher. "No source, no action." Then another version, breathless and low. "Please answer." All of them me. Different ages by a hair, different moods, different distances from the mic. One sounded like the man from the recordings, one sounded like me in the room. One sounded like someone who had been underwater too long and still found enough air to speak. The voices argued over each other until none was fully intelligible. Avery slapped the speaker grill with the heel of his hand. The sound didn't stop. "You think this is punishment," he said over the noise. "It isn't that clean." "Then what is it?" "It's a chance." "To do what? Trap myself properly this time?" That landed. He looked away for a second, and that was answer enough, because by then I had worked out the other side of the problem. If he had lived this sequence already, if he knew the cutoffs and the camera wake and the way the alarm died mid-sound when I hesitated, then Avery wasn't just ahead of me in time. He might be what remained after choosing, or after failing to choose, or after choosing wrong in a place where wrong didn't settle into the past. "Who are you?" I asked, and I meant it differently now. His eyes met mine again. They were bloodshot with exhaustion, and in the weak overhead light he looked both older and younger than when I'd first seen him. Worn through in places, like the building had kept using him and resetting him and using him again. "I was on shift," he said. It wasn't enough. It was the truest answer he had. The ferry drifted closer. Through the window I could now see frost feathering along the edge of the glass, though the room itself hadn't gotten colder. The hull outside gave one soft, impossible bump against the dock without sending any ripple through the water. Inside the speaker, one version of my voice whispered, "Don't make yourself part of it." Another answered, "You already are." The words hit harder because both sounded reasonable. That was the shape of the dilemma. Not good or evil, not courage or cowardice. Procedure against conscience, both poisoned. And if I obeyed the rule and refused to acknowledge the unlit arrival, I would be doing exactly what I had done years earlier. Withholding action because the conditions weren't clean enough, because certainty hadn't been granted, because I wanted the world to prove urgency before I let it inconvenience me. If I answered, if I stepped outside and signaled that ferry, if I treated the alert as real despite the rule, then maybe I broke the loop. Maybe I did the one thing I had failed to do before. Or maybe I completed the machinery of it. Maybe the building wanted not my guilt but my consent. Maybe acknowledgement was the hook. Maybe responding meant taking the seat that one of those voices had already filled, staying behind in the system as the next warning for whoever came after me. Neither choice let me walk out whole, and that was the most honest thing in the room. Avery came closer. "I need you to hear me." The speaker filled with my own overlapping arguments, louder now, nearly shouting over one another. The alarm threaded under them. The hum in the walls became a vibration through the soles of my boots. Somewhere down on the dock, metal rang once against metal like a line hook striking a cleat. Avery said, "Inaction is what trapped us." Us. I grabbed that word. Us? He shut his eyes briefly. When he opened them, there was no point pretending we were still having a normal conversation inside normal time. "I told myself the rules were protection," he said. "Then I told myself the rules were a test. Then I told myself the rules were bait. I kept thinking if I interpreted them correctly, I'd earn a clean way out." His mouth tightened. "There isn't one." The radio spat my own voice back at me. "It's probably nothing." Then quieter from somewhere deeper in the static, "I hear them." That broke something in me, because it was true. I had heard them the first time. That was the wound under everything. Not ignorance, not bad luck, not a system failure that happened around me. I heard the alarms. I heard the channel traffic escalate. I heard the repeated signal from a vessel stalled where the current could push it sideways into rock. I knew enough. I chose less. I muted what I could stand to mute and called it judgment until 2 people died inside the consequences. All those years I had defended myself in fractions. Not for long, not fully asleep, not certain, not malicious. The terminal stripped all that off. It gave me the core of it in a voice I couldn't excuse. You heard them. Outside, the ferry bumped the dock again, harder this time. Still no wake. Still no lights. Avery looked toward the door to the service landing. "If you go out there, the alarm stops." "You know that how?" He almost smiled. It was the saddest expression I saw on him. "Because that's the part I never reached." The room seemed to tilt without moving. I felt suddenly clearly that Avery wasn't a guide or a trap alone. He was a remainder, a future caught behind a decision or a past pushed ahead of it. The foil to my worst habit wasn't bravery. It was repetition with a human face. "And if I do go out there," I said, "what happens to me?" Avery's answer came after too long. "I don't know which version leaves." The voices on the radio were shouting now. One said answer, one said don't, one begged, one mocked, and one repeated the phrasing from the official inquiry in cold, clipped tones. One simply breathed into the mic as if water were rising around his mouth. The alarm sounded full sequence again, then again, too close together, as if time had folded the pulses on top of each other. I put my hands on the desk and felt the metal vibrate. The mute switch sat under my right thumb. Smooth, familiar, easy. I lifted my hand away from it like it was hot. That tiny movement felt bigger than anything I'd done in years. "I can't ignore it again," I said. Avery nodded, and for the first time he looked relieved, or doomed. It was hard to tell the difference on him. The cold outside was knife-sharp. The moment I pushed open the service door, the smell hit first. Freezing salt air, old fuel, wet wood. And that metallic tang you get around dead electrical equipment after a hard short. My eyes watered. The dock boards under my boots were slick with frost. Farther out, the water lay black and flat under the pre-dawn dark, absorbing every small sound instead of carrying it. Behind me, through the open doorway, the terminal screamed with overlapping alarms and my own voices tearing at each other through the radio. Ahead of me, the ferry waited against the dock without lights. It was close enough now that I could see the line of the bow, the shadowed windows, the blank dark where the bridge should have been lit. No crew on deck, no engine thrum through the water, no movement except the slow pressure of the hull leaning against rubber fenders with soft, dead impacts. Avery came to the doorway but did not step outside, and the light from the operations room cut around him, leaving his face half in shadow. "Do it," he said. The rule from Lorraine's log pulsed in my head. If the ferry arrives without lights, do not acknowledge it. The cost of obeying that rule stood beside every other memory I had spent years sanding down. A silenced alarm, a delayed response. 2 people held inside a vessel while I sat in my chair and told myself someone else would escalate if it mattered. The cost of breaking it stood right in front of me, shapeless because the building refused to make that fear clean. Maybe I would save nothing. Maybe I would step into the role the system wanted and never fully leave. Maybe the voice already calling from the radio was the version of me that had answered this one last time. I could not solve it. That was what made it real. And on a hook by the service door hung an old emergency signal lamp, the handheld kind used when docking systems failed. I snatched it down. The casing was so cold it stuck to my palm for a second. The battery indicator glowed weak but alive. My thumb found the trigger. Behind me, the radio from inside the terminal came through the open doorway. My voice clear and terrified now. "Colton, please!" Then another version, furious. "Don't you dare!" Then the calm dispatch tone from the first voice I had heard in the room. "You already ignored this once." Avery's hand closed around the edge of the doorframe. "Whatever happens," he said, "don't mute it." The ferry gave one final soft impact against the dock. I raised the lamp. For 1 second, maybe less, and I froze there with the trigger under my finger and the black water holding everything perfectly still. No wind over the sound, no slap under the pilings, no gulls, no machinery. Just the hum from the terminal behind me and the terrible possibility that both choices were still the same failure wearing different clothes. Then I squeezed the trigger and sent a hard white signal beam across the unlit deck. The effect was immediate. The alarm inside the terminal cut off. Not faded, not ended, stopped. Every system behind me began shutting down one by one with neat mechanical clicks. Overhead lights dimmed, monitors went black. The hum in the walls dwindled like something retreating through a long tunnel. Even the radio voices died mid-argument, clipped clean out of the air. The ferry in front of me did not light up. It did not answer. It did not disgorge survivors or ghosts or anything else simple enough to understand. It only seemed for a brief, impossible second less solid than the dock beside it, as if the beam had outlined not a vessel but the shape left by one. Then it was gone. No splash, no wake, just empty water against the pilings, and this time the surface moved. Small ripples spread from the dock fenders. Real ones, uneven, ordinary. One slapped softly against a piling and came back. I stood there with the lamp still raised and tears on my face from the cold. Behind me, the terminal had gone nearly dark. I turned. Avery was no longer in the doorway. I went back inside anyway, calling his name once, then again louder. The building answered with settling metal and the tick of cooling systems. The operations room was dead except for the emergency exit sign, and the radio sat silent on the desk. Lorraine's rules page was gone from my pocket until I found it folded neatly under the paper log, dry and flat as if it had never been handled. Avery's mug was gone from the alcove. No steam, no cup ring, no sign anyone else had stood there at all. Only one thing remained that I hadn't left. On the paper log, in my handwriting and not my handwriting, there was a final line beneath my last entry. Signal received, no timestamp. Dawn came thin and gray over Bainbridge. Once the road had enough light to trust, I locked the terminal, put the key back in the box, and drove. My hands shook on the wheel for the first 10 minutes. Not badly. Just enough that I kept flexing them at stop signs to make sure they still belonged to me. The island looked ordinary in daylight. Wet cedar, roadside frost, and mailboxes leaning toward the road. The kind of morning where people warmed up their trucks and cursed the cold and had no idea anything in the dark a few miles away had spent all night deciding whether a man could repeat himself forever. At the ferry landing to Seattle, I parked in line with the commuters and sat through loading with the heater running too high. I kept expecting someone to call. County contractor, police. A supervisor I had never met telling me the passive monitoring site had suffered a power failure. Nobody called. When the boat pulled away from Bainbridge, the water beneath us moved like water should. Chopped gray, wind creased, alive with small, indifferent motion. I stood at the aft rail despite the cold and watched the island recede into morning haze. My coat still smelled faintly of old fuel and salt. In my pocket, the portable radio from Pier 17B clicked. I hadn't remembered taking it. The sound was small, almost polite, then a burst of static. Then my own voice came through, weak and thinned by distance, as if from far out over open water. "Help me!" I didn't turn right away. The voice came again, carried under by hiss. "I'm in the sound." It was me, not just the tone, not just the shape of the words, the private strain in it, the exact catch before the second syllable of help, the breath placement, the fear. I looked back then past the churn of the ferry wake toward the island shrinking in the gray. Nothing out there but water. The radio trembled in my hand. My thumb hovered over the volume dial, then over the mute switch on the side. I left both alone. Since that morning, I haven't been able to stand a room that hums without knowing what's feeding it. I check every clock twice and trust none of them. If a speaker clicks, I listen. If an alarm starts, I let it finish. The pad of my right thumb still has a pale crescent where the signal lamp trigger bit into the skin in the cold. And every so often, when the house is quiet and the pipes settle after midnight, I feel that little mark sting as if metal were freezing against it again. The voice stayed on the radio all the way across the sound. It still does sometimes, and I still can't tell if I'm the one who answered or the one calling from the water.